Hi guys, so today I'm going to be doing my November wrap-up, and I haven't done a wrap-up in a couple of months now, but I want to really start doing them again, and I'm really happy how my November reading month went. I read 5 books, and considering I was pretty busy this month, I'm really happy with the amount I read. Of course, I really enjoyed all of the books I read this month actually, and I'm really happy about that. So the first book I read was Raise High the Roof Beam, Carpenters and Seymour, an Introduction by J.D. Salinger. This book was published in 1963, and it's a collection of 2 novellas that Salinger wrote. Both of the novellas deal with the Glass family, and I'm not going to go into really great detail about each one. However, the first one is about Buddy Glass, who goes to New York because it's Seymour's wedding, and he's going there, and he basically ends up having all these interactions with the bride's family, and I found they were quite hilarious and very interesting interactions. I really enjoyed this short story. I thought it was really well written. Like I said, a lot of the books I read this month were well written, but this one in particular, I think I just really liked J.D. Salinger's writing style, and I really liked getting into Buddy Glass's head and learning a bit more about Seymour through this story. The second novella in this collection was Seymour, an Introduction, and I didn't love this one as much as the first one, and I've noticed that a lot of people say that. The novella is basically written by Buddy Glass, and it's about him trying to give an accurate picture of his brother Seymour. And while I find it really interesting to learn more about their childhood, because I find the Glass family really fascinating, I also found the style a bit difficult to get into. It was written in a stream of consciousness style, and I'm not a huge fan of that style. But overall, once I got through, I would say the first 30 or 40 pages, I really got into the story and I really enjoyed it. I would say this book is really good for people who really like J.D. Salinger's writing and people who have read his other works. I don't necessarily think it would be a great book to start if you haven't read any of J.D. Salinger's work. If you haven't read anything, I would probably recommend you start with either Franny and Zoe, which is probably my favorite, or Catcher in the Rye. The next book I read is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I really enjoyed this. A lot of people probably have read this who are watching this video because this is a very popular book, very beloved classic, and it's really one of those books that I've heard such great things about, and it pretty much lived up to my expectations. It's about an unnamed narrator who goes and she's looking back on her life, especially on this period of her life when she went and married this widower, Max de Winter. She went to live with him on his estate at Manderley, and once she's there, she realizes that his whole house is kind of haunted, metaphorically speaking, by his dead wife, and there's a lot of mystery about what happened with his dead wife, and there's this very creepy servant, Mrs. Danvers, who lives in the house and keeps Rebecca, who is the dead wife's name, alive. And it was a very creepy, mysterious novel, and I really enjoyed it. I would say this is a really fun read to read in the winter. It's really enjoyable, it's really engrossing, and I really liked how, despite how all of the characters were pretty much unlikable, I still really found the story interesting and the characters engaging. So the next book I read was Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward, which is another novel that I had heard very good things about, also some mixed reviews as well, and I agree a lot with some of the points brought up by people who had mixed reviews of this book. This book is about Esh, who is 14 years old and she's pregnant, and Hurricane Katrina is happening. So this novel takes place over the course of 12 days. Some of the days are before the hurricane, there's one day during the hurricane, and then there's a bit of the aftermath. And you really get to see the world through Esh's point of view and through her interpretation of everything that's happening around her. And I really enjoyed her character. I really enjoyed seeing all of the other people in her family and how they dealt with certain things. At the same time as the hurricane is happening, there's also the storyline about her brother Skeeta's dog, who is pregnant, who gave birth to puppies, and he's trying to keep the puppies alive. And so there's that whole storyline going on at the same time. And I would say there's a lot going on in this novel, and despite how much goes on in the novel, it's really short. It was about 260 pages, and I would say that's probably my main problem with the novel, is that it's so short, and despite all of the stuff that we get to know about in the beginning of the novel, I found that we could have learned so much more about this family and about Esh, and I really wanted to learn more, and I think that if the novel had been maybe 100 pages longer, we would have gotten so much more information and I would have enjoyed it a lot more. Even though I do have that little problem, I did find it a very engaging novel and I really enjoyed it, and I think it's an important story to tell. So the next book I read was Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day by Winifred Watson, which is a book that Persephone Books reissued in 2001 and published in this gorgeous edition. I actually discussed this book very briefly in my beautiful covers tag, which I will leave a link to down below if you haven't seen it. This book is about a governess, Miss Pettigrew, who is sent to the wrong address by her agency, and instead of being sent to an address to take care of children, she is sent to a nightclub singer's address. And she basically spends a day with this nightclub singer, and she gets to experience the world in a very different way than she had previously experienced it. Miss Pettigrew is a very reserved woman, very, I guess, sheltered, and not really into a lot of the dramatic things that go on in this nightclub singer's life, and she really opens her mind throughout the whole process. But at the same time, there were a couple of things that bothered me about the novel, and I would say the main one is something that I'm not quite sure how to discuss in a video. Basically, there are some anti-Semitic remarks that are thrown around, which I really felt made me uncomfortable, and I never quite know how to deal with things like that in books, because on the one hand it is a product of its time, on the other hand it is something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, including me, and I think that it's something that I need to warn you guys about, because I feel like I can't just 100% recommend a book if I know it might upset people. So I would still recommend it if you want a lighthearted read, but at the same time just keep in mind that there are some anti-Semitic remarks thrown around which are quite uncomfortable. So the next book I read in November was Bobcat and Other Stories by Rebecca Lee, and this is a collection of 7 short stories, and I loved this book. It was probably my favorite book of the month. All of the short stories deal with love and loss, and with marriage, and with academic settings, and with ethical dilemmas and morals, and I just really enjoyed all of these. Of course, there are a couple I loved more than others. I really enjoyed the title story, Bobcat. I thought it was really fun, and I really also enjoyed the story Min, as well as The Banks of the Vistula, which are, I would say, probably the standout stories from this collection. I would say if you really like short stories, you would probably really enjoy this. At the same time, the short stories are a bit longer than other short stories I've seen in other collections, so each story is probably around 30 pages. I really like that because I feel like when a short story is too short, I don't get as invested in the characters. Because it's 30 pages long each, I found each short story really easy to get into, and also I had enough time with the characters to feel like I got to know them a bit better. That was my November wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys soon.